6 Unseen marks of women with high spiritual power, according to the Bible. There are women walking among us whose strength is not obvious at first glance. They don't announce themselves. They don't compete for attention. They are not always the loudest voice in the room, or the most visible presence in the church. Yet when they enter a season, a family, a room, or even a spiritual battle, something shifts. Peace becomes possible. Truth becomes clearer. Darkness feels exposed. This kind of power is rarely celebrated because it does not look like the world's version of strength. It does not demand recognition. It does not need applause. It comes from a place much deeper. The Bible reveals that God often entrusts his greatest spiritual authority to those who have learned to walk with him in private. Especially women who have been shaped by obedience when no one was watching, refined by pain they did not cause, and strengthened by prayers whispered instead of shouted. Their power is not rooted in personality, status, or influence. It is rooted in intimacy with God, and that intimacy leaves marks, quiet, unseen marks that only the spiritually attentive can recognize. Many women carrying this kind of spiritual power have spent years questioning themselves. They've wondered why their path feels heavier, why their sensitivity feels sharper, why they cannot live comfortably in shallow faith or surface-level relationships. They are often misunderstood, sometimes resisted, and frequently underestimated. Yet Scripture shows us again and again that God does not measure strength the way humans do. He looks at the heart. He looks at surrender. He looks at faithfulness in hidden places. This message is not about elevating women above others. It is about revealing how God works through women who yield themselves fully to him. It is about recognizing the signs of spiritual authority that the world overlooks but heaven recognizes instantly. If you have felt a quiet fire within you, one that does not burn to consume others but burns to stay faithful, you may be closer to God's purpose than you realize. As we walk through these unseen marks, listen with your spirit, not just your ears. Some of these truths may confirm what you've sensed for years. Others may challenge you, but all of them point back to one reality: spiritual power, according to the Bible, is never about being seen. It is about being aligned. And when a woman is aligned with God, her influence reaches far beyond what eyes can see. Number 1, a spirit that remains steady in silence. One of the clearest, unseen marks of a woman with high spiritual power is her ability to remain steady in silence. Not silent because she has nothing to say, and not silent because she is afraid, but silent because she trusts God more than she trusts the outcome of her own words. This kind of silence is rare, and it is deeply spiritual. The world teaches women to explain themselves, defend their intentions, and prove their worth. But the Bible reveals a different kind of strength. Spiritually powerful women understand that not every battle is won by speaking, and not every misunderstanding needs correction. They have learned that God does some of his greatest work when they step back and let him speak on their behalf. This silence is not passive. It is active faith. It is the decision to rest in God's justice rather than chase human validation. These women may feel deeply, notice everything, and understand far more than they reveal. But they choose restraint, and that restraint protects their spirit. It keeps them from being pulled into unnecessary conflict, emotional exhaustion, or spiritual distraction. Often, this mark is formed through pain. A woman learns silence after realizing that words did not save her, arguing did not heal her, and explaining herself did not change hardened hearts. Over time, she discovers something freeing. God does not require her to be understood by everyone. He requires her to be faithful. Silence becomes her shelter, not her prison. In Scripture, God repeatedly honors those who wait on him quietly. He strengthens those who trust him without demanding immediate answers. A woman who can be still under pressure carries authority because her peace does not depend on circumstances. Her calm unsettles chaos. Her composure exposes insecurity in others. and her silence often speaks louder than words ever could. This kind of woman may be mistaken for weak by those who do not understand spiritual depth. But in the spiritual realm, she is recognized as disciplined, anchored, and mature. She does not rush to react because she knows God is already moving. And when she does speak, her words carry weight because they are few, intentional, and aligned with truth. If you have learned to be quiet not because you gave up, but because you gave it to God, this is not loss, it is formation. Silence, when rooted in faith, is not absence of power, it is evidence of it. Number 2, unshakable faith formed through hidden suffering. Another powerful mark of a woman with high spiritual authority is a faith that did not come easily. It was not formed in comfort, applause, or smooth seasons. It was forged in places where no one clapped, no one noticed, and sometimes no one even believed her. This kind of faith is unshakable because it has already been shaken and survived. The Bible shows us that God often allows his strongest servants to walk through silent suffering before he entrusts them with deeper spiritual weight. For many women, this suffering is not dramatic or public. It is quiet, long seasons of waiting, prayers that seem unanswered, betrayals that cut deep, losses that changed them forever. And yet they stayed. They did not walk away from God when it would have been understandable to do so. A woman with this mark has learned how to believe without evidence. She has trusted God when the situation contradicted his promises. She has obeyed even when obedience felt costly. Over time, her faith stopped being emotional and became rooted. She no longer believes because things are going well. She believes because she knows who God is. This kind of faith carries authority because it cannot be easily manipulated by fear. Storms may still affect her emotions, but they do not erase her foundation. She has already learned that God remains faithful even when circumstances collapse, and that knowledge gives her spiritual stability that others sense immediately. Often, these women do not talk much about what they endured, not because it didn't matter, but because they have already made peace with it. Their suffering became sacred ground where God met them personally. Where others see wounds, God sees depth. Where others see weakness, God sees proven faith. Scripture makes it clear that endurance produces spiritual maturity, and maturity produces discernment, wisdom, and authority. A woman who has walked through fire with God does not panic when heat rises again. She knows the sound of his voice in the dark. She knows how to stand when everything else feels uncertain. If your faith was born in pain rather than privilege, this is not a disadvantage. It is preparation. God often hides his strongest work inside the most difficult season. And when a woman emerges still believing, still trusting, still praying, heaven recognizes her strength long before the world does. Number 3, discernment that sees beyond appearances. A woman with high spiritual power carries a kind of discernment that cannot be taught by books or sharpened by experience alone. It comes from walking closely with God for a long time. This discernment allows her to sense what is real beneath what is presented, to notice what others overlook, and to feel when something is spiritually misaligned even if it looks acceptable on the surface. This is why such women are often described as too sensitive or overthinking. In truth, they are spiritually alert. They pick up on tone, timing, motives, and atmosphere. They sense when peace is false, when kindness is performative, and when silence is hiding something unresolved. The Bible repeatedly shows that God gives discernment to those who fear him, not to make them suspicious, but to keep them aligned with truth. This mark often develops after betrayal or disappointment. A woman learns discernment when she realizes that words can lie, actions can deceive, and appearances can be carefully constructed. Instead of becoming cynical, she becomes spiritually aware. She learns to pause, pray, and listen before trusting. Her discernment is not judgmental. It is protective. Spiritually powerful women do not rush into decisions or relationships simply because something looks good or feels exciting. They wait for peace that comes from God, not pressure from people. They understand that spiritual danger rarely announces itself clearly. It usually arrives dressed as comfort, opportunity, or familiarity. Discernment helps her see through the disguise. This ability can feel lonely. Others may not understand why she hesitates when everyone else feels confident, or why she withdraws when things seem fine. But Scripture reminds us that God often reveals truth to the discerning before he reveals it to the crowd. What she senses today often becomes visible to others later. Her discernment also allows her to recognize God's movement in subtle ways. She notices divine timing, quiet warning, and gentle redirections. She does not need dramatic signs to trust God's leading. A whisper is enough, and because she listens, she is protected from many paths that would have drained her spirit. If you have learned to trust what God shows you, even when you cannot fully explain it, this is not imagination. It is discernment. And discernment is one of the clearest signs of spiritual power, because it keeps a woman aligned with truth long before deception has a chance to take root. Number 4. A heart trained to obey God above approval. One of the strongest yet most costly marks of a woman with high spiritual power is her willingness to obey God, even when it costs her approval, comfort, or understanding from others. This kind of obedience does not come naturally. It is learned through moments where pleasing people would have been easier, but obeying God was necessary. Spiritually powerful women eventually realize that approval is a poor foundation for a faithful life. People change. Opinions shift. Praise is temporary, but God's voice remains steady. Over time, these women stop asking, "Will they understand me?" and begin asking, "Is this what God is asking of me?" That shift changes everything. This obedience often leads them down paths that look confusing from the outside. Others may question their decisions, misunderstand their boundaries, or criticize their priorities. But Scripture reminds us that obedience has always set God's people apart. It is rarely popular. It is rarely applauded. Yet it is always powerful. A woman trained in obedience does not need constant reassurance. She has learned to move forward with God even when affirmation is absent. She knows that obedience is not about being perfect, but about being surrendered, and that surrender gives God room to work through her in ways she may never fully see. This mark is especially evident in moments where obedience requires letting go of relationships, roles, expectations, or dreams that no longer align with God's will. These decisions are often made in private through prayer and conviction, not public announcement, and yet heaven responds to them immediately. The Bible shows us that God entrusts greater spiritual influence to those who obey him in small, unseen ways. A woman who chooses obedience in the quiet places develops spiritual authority in the visible one. Her life becomes a testimony, not because she speaks loudly about faith, but because her choices consistently reflect it. If you have ever felt alone in your obedience, misunderstood in your convictions, or questioned for following God instead of the crowd, this is not a sign that you are wrong. It is often a sign that you are being shaped. Obedience, when rooted in love for God, is one of the clearest indicators of spiritual power, because it proves where a woman's allegiance truly lies. Number 5. Compassion. That flows from depth, not naivety. A woman with high spiritual power carries compassion that is deep, steady, and grounded in wisdom. It is not the kind of compassion that comes from insecurity or the need to be liked. It is the kind that has been shaped by pain, discernment, and a clear understanding of human nature. She loves deeply, but she does not love blindly. This compassion is often misunderstood. Some assume that because she is kind, she must be weak. Because she forgives, she must tolerate anything. Because she shows grace, she must lack boundaries. But the Bible teaches us that true compassion flows from strength, not from fear. Spiritually powerful women know how to extend mercy without abandoning truth. Many women develop this mark after being taken advantage of in the past. They learn the difference between empathy and self-betrayal. Over time, God teaches them how to love without rescuing, to help without enabling, and to forgive without reopening doors that lead to harm. Their compassion becomes intentional rather than impulsive. This kind of woman feels deeply, but she is no longer ruled by emotion. She can sit with someone's pain without absorbing it. She can offer kindness without surrendering her peace, and she can say no without guilt, knowing that love does not require self-destruction. Scripture shows us that Jesus himself embodied this balance perfectly, full of compassion, yet never manipulated, full of mercy, yet unwavering in truth. Women who grow into spiritual maturity reflect this same pattern. Their compassion draws people in, but their discernment keeps them aligned with God. This mark gives her spiritual authority because it mirrors God's heart. People feel safe around her, not because she agrees with everything, but because she sees clearly and loves sincerely. Her presence brings comfort without confusion, and her words bring healing without compromise. If you have learned to love with wisdom instead of fear, to give without losing yourself, and to remain kind even after being hurt, this is not something you were born with. It was formed. Compassion shaped by depth is one of the strongest signs of spiritual power because it reflects a heart that has been transformed, not hardened, by life. Number 6. A quiet authority that shifts atmospheres. One of the most unmistakable marks of a woman with high spiritual power is something that cannot be explained easily, yet is immediately felt. When she enters a space, the atmosphere changes. Conversations slow down, emotions settle. Tension either rises to the surface or quietly dissolves. This does not happen because she demands attention, but because she carries an inner authority rooted in God's presence. This authority is quiet. It does not need to dominate or control. It does not rely on volume, charisma, or position. In fact, many spiritually powerful women prefer to stay in the background. But even in silence, their presence speaks. People feel convicted, comforted, or awakened around them without fully understanding why. The Bible shows us that true authority flows from alignment with God, not from titles. A woman who walks close with him carries spiritual weight because her spirit is anchored. She is not easily shaken, easily offended, or easily impressed. Her stability becomes a spiritual anchor in unstable environments. This mark often develops after years of surrender, after learning to be still, to obey, to discern, to endure, and to love wisely. Authority grows when a woman stops trying to prove herself and starts trusting God to work through her. The less she strives, the more God moves. People may come to her for guidance, prayer, or simply to sit near her, sensing peace without explanation. Others may feel uncomfortable around her, not because she is harsh, but because light exposes what is hidden. This is not something she controls. It is a result of God's Spirit resting on her life. Scripture teaches that God's presence brings order wherever it dwells. A woman who consistently yields herself to God becomes a vessel of that presence. She does not chase influence, it follows her. She does not force change, it happens naturally. If you have noticed that your presence affects others even when you say little, if you sense responsibility without recognition, and if you feel called to intercede rather than perform, this is not coincidence. It is spiritual authority, and it is one of the clearest signs that God is working through you in ways that go far beyond what can be seen. Conclusion. The truth is, spiritual power has never looked the way the world expects it to look. According to the Bible, it is not loud, flashy, or self-centered. It does not seek recognition, and it does not need to prove itself. It is formed in quiet obedience, in hidden endurance, in discernment shaped by truth, and in love refined by wisdom. That is why so many women who carry deep spiritual power spend much of their lives feeling unseen, because God is more interested in who they are becoming than in how visible they are. If you recognized yourself in these unseen marks, it is not because you imagined them. It is because God has been shaping you in ways that are not always comfortable, but always intentional. The silence you learned, the suffering you endured, the obedience that cost you, the compassion you refined, and the authority you carry without asking for it. All of these are signs of spiritual formation, not spiritual absence. The Bible reminds us that God often works most powerfully through those who are willing to be overlooked. He entrusts his strength to those who will not misuse it. A woman who walks humbly with God becomes dangerous to darkness, even when she appears ordinary to people. Her faith does not need to be announced, because it is evident in how she stands, how she loves, and how she remains steady when others collapse. This message is not a call to comparison or pride. It is an invitation to remain faithful, to continue walking with God even when the path feels lonely, to trust that unseen work is still real work, and to remember that heaven always recognizes what the world ignores. If God has placed this quiet strength within you, protect it, nurture it, stay close to Him, because the women He empowers most deeply are often the ones who never seek power at all, but choose faithfulness instead.